Hello, and welcome back to the Loco Files. In today's episode, we'll be looking at the Ivatt C1 Atlantics. The C1 Atlantics were built from 1902 until 1910 and were designed to take over the express passenger workings from Stirling's singles. The class survived intact until 1944, with the last member being withdrawn in 1950. One member has survived into preservation as part of the National Collection. The C1s weren't the first Atlantic Ivatt produced, that honour going to the C2 Klondikes from 1898. In December 1902, he built number 251 by adapting the design and increasing the boiler diameter from 4 foot 8 inches to 5 foot 6 inches. The Great Northern Railway classified both types as C1. However, upon the grouping of Britain's railways in 1923, the large boilers remained as C1s, where the smaller boilered Atlantics became the C2 class. Ivatt strongly believed that a locomotive's success depended on its capacity to boil water. Hence, he gave the C1s a large, for the time, boiler and firebox. Although the boiler was large, there was not a corresponding increase in cylinder size, and the C1 retained the 18.75 by 24 inch cylinders of the C2 Klondikes. Number 251 had the same springs as the C2s, but the heavier design resulted in an uncomfortable ride. Longer springs were quickly fitted. 20 more C1s were built in 1904, but the initial performance was a disappointment. The wide firebox left no space for screw reversing gear, so a lever-operated mechanism was used instead. Unfortunately, this tended to be hard to operate, especially at speed. Also, drivers tended to handle the locomotives in a conservative manner due to restricting valve timings, leading to a tendency to consume a large amount of water. Between 1905 and 1908, 60 large boilered C1s were built with simple expansion. These locomotives replaced the lever reversing gear for screw reversing gear, which was assisted by air pressure. The firebox had to be slightly redesigned so that there was enough room to fit the screw reverser. Ivatt took advantage of this needed redesign and deepened the firebox at the front. The greater slope helped to shake the coal to the front, aiding in firing. Earlier locomotives needed their frames altering to take boilers with this deeper firebox. Alterations started in 1925 and were completed in 1933. Ivatt's last development was the fitting of the piston valves and Schmidt superheaters to the last 10 C1s built in 1910. The addition of a superheater was matched with an increase in cylinder size from 18.75 to 20 inches in diameter. At the time, superheating was viewed as a method to decrease the boiler pressure, hence the working pressure was decreased from 175 psi to 150. Due to poor performance, Ivatt built a 4-cylinder compound version numbered 292 in March 1905. The outside cylinders drove the trailing coupled axle, whilst the inside cylinders drove the leading coupled axle. Woolshart's valve gear was used on the outside cylinders, but the inside cylinders were fitted with Stephenson valve gear. A valve was fitted beneath the smokebox, which switched the locomotive from simple to compound working. This was controlled from the cab, enabling the driver to switch between the two. The boiler was built to operate at 225 psi, but actually only operated at around 200, with no evidence being found to suggest that 225 was ever used. Between 1910 and 1912, a standard 175 psi Atlantic boiler was fitted whilst repairs were being made to the original high-pressure boiler. Number 292 was never superheated and was withdrawn from service in August 1928. The boiler was equipped with a 24-element Robinson superheater and fitted to the 4-cylinder simple engine number 279. This first attempt clearly did not satisfy Ivatt. The Great Northern directors were not satisfied either, and a second 4-cylinder compound, numbered 1300, was built in July 1905. This was built by the Vulcan Foundry after the Great Northern approached 5 companies with broad specifications. The layout was similar to number 292, with the high-pressured cylinder on the outside and a divided drive. The boiler had a working pressure of 200 psi. Due to various problems in the first few thousand miles, number 1300 quickly acquired a bad reputation. Comparative trials between the two compounds and a simple expansion, number 296, showed that number 292 had the best coal consumption, but number 296 had a lower oil consumption due to it only having 2 cylinders. In 1914, number 1300 was fitted with a Robinson 22-element superheater, and the smokebox was lengthened by 9 inches. The working pressure is believed to have been reduced to 175 psi, although the engine diagrams continued to show a working pressure of 200. Performance was still unsatisfactory, so when number 1300 suffered from a fractured cylinder in 1917, the opportunity was taken to rebuild it as a 2-cylinder simple engine. Number 1300 continued to perform poorly and was withdrawn in October 1924, having only run 390,798 miles, which in comparison to C1's number 1407 to 1409, all managed over 625,000 miles each over the same period. Number 1421 was the last of Ivatt's C1 compound locomotives, and incorporated features from both 292 and 1300. 292's layout of cylinder and valve gear was used, but the Stevenson valve gear on the inside was replaced with Woolsharts. The slide valves were positioned slightly differently, allowing the inside cylinders to be increased in diameter to 18 inches. The boiler pressure was 200 psi. Although no tests are known about, number 1421 had a reputation for being a better performer than number 292, although it suffered from various issues. Gresley was the first to modify number 1421 by adding a 22-element Robinson superheater in 1914. It was rebuilt a second time in 1920 as a standard C1 Atlantic with a 24-element Robinson superheater and piston valves. Gresley succeeded Ivatt in 1911 and built no further Atlantics. However, he continued to make improvements to the C1s, and the fact that the original 1898 Klondike design was capable of so many improvements delayed the need for the Great Northern to invest in new express passenger locomotives until the early 1920s, when Gresley introduced his acclaimed A1 Pacifics. Between 1914 and 1915, 5 saturated locomotives had Schmidt superheaters fitted. In 1914, number 1442 was fitted with a 24-element Robinson superheater, and shortly afterwards, Gresley ordered that no further Schmidt superheaters should be obtained. Robinson superheaters were gradually fitted to saturated locomotives, with the last conversion occurring in 1926. Schmidt superheaters were replaced with the Robinson type as and when they wore out, with the last conversion being in 1927. The LNER slowly replaced the 24-element Robinson superheaters with a 32-element type instead. The last of these replacements occurred in 1934. It is generally acknowledged that the C1s performed their best work when fitted with a 32-element Robinson superheater. In 1914, A lot happened to that class that year apparently. Gresley rebuilt number 279 with 4 15-inch diameter cylinders using simple expansion. A new front end was fitted. All 4 cylinders drove the rear-coupled axle, and a second-hand boiler was fitted. This had a 24-element Robinson superheater, and the boiler pressure was reduced from 175 to 170 psi. The boiler needed replacing in 1928, so the boiler from number 3292, which was withdrawn in January 1927, was fitted. A completely new boiler was fitted 4 years later in 1932 with a deep firebox, 32-element superheater, and Ross Pop safety valves. A final rebuild occurred in 1937 when it was decided to convert number 3279 to a 2-cylinder locomotive with K2 pattern 20 by 26 inch cylinders and modern steam passages. Number 3279 was involved in coal consumption tests alongside Thompson B1 number 8301 Springbok in 1944. On heavier loads, the B1 had a slight economy advantage over the Atlantic. After grouping, trials were performed between number 1447 and Atlantics from the Northeastern and North British Railways. For these trials, number 1447 had an arch roof cab fitted so that it would fit within the North British loading gauge. 4 3-inch diameter Ramsbottom safety valves were fitted as standard during Great Northern ownership. These were eventually replaced with 2 3-inch diameter Rosspop safety valves after 1923, although a couple of C1s would keep their Ramsbottom valves until withdrawal. Ivatt's standard bogie design was used. Due to recurring fractures, these were replaced with a strengthened type in 1909 onwards. In 1934, there was a plan to replace these with side control springs as used on Gresley's Pacifics at the time. This plan was dropped due to costs and the fact that the C1 bogies gave little trouble in this form. In 1923, number 1419 was fitted with a booster to increase tractive effort when starting heavy loads on steep gradients. In theory, this booster could improve tractive effort by roughly 50%. The booster was a small 2-cylinder engine incorporated into the trailing pony truck, which could be engaged with gears when required. A Westinghouse pump was fitted to operate the gear engagement with compressed air. The cylinders were 10-inch by 12-inch and were connected to the axle with gears of a total ratio of 36:14. The tractive effort at 71.5% was quoted to be £8,500. The booster performed well during initial trials, although boiler pressure was observed to drop quickly when the booster was in operation. This was due to the booster exhaust choking the main exhaust, resulting in no sharp blast in the smokebox. Although starting power was increased greatly, slipping would occur if full steam pressure was applied. Over the next 5 years, various changes were made. In 1923, steam-operated sanding gear was added to the booster wheels to stop the slipping. In March 1924, a new blast pipe arrangement was fitted, but this had mixed results. 1 month later, a shorter chimney and low dome were fitted so that number 1419 could run on the Northeastern and North British networks. After trials in the West Auckland area, the Westinghouse pump and booster were removed for around 7 months to allow for modifications. The booster was refitted in February 1925 and incorporated a new gear ratio of 36:24 to allow for faster running with the booster engaged. This would also increase the adhesion and reduce slipping. The control system was changed for a steam system and the Westinghouse pump was not refitted. Another new blast pipe arrangement was fitted. After these changes, number 1419 performed much better in the tests. Steaming was much better with the new blast pipe arrangement, and the steam control mechanism meant the booster could be engaged in 5 seconds compared to the 15 seconds of the air system. With these successes, number 1419, now renumbered 4419, entered service in February 1926, pulling the Pullman services between Leeds and London. Although the booster functioned well, reports started to appear of rough riding. Brasses in the booster axle boxes frequently broke. Unfortunately, the original design had no allowance for spring suspension, and there was now no room for helical or leaf springs to be fitted. Concentric rubber springs between the booster casing and the engine cross strut were fitted in November 1926, and in 1927 tests were performed over the Waverley route. Although the booster would be useful for starting trains anywhere on the route, it could not be used at the speeds required to keep to the current timetable. In June 1927, number 4419 was back to the Leeds Pullman services, but so were the reports of poor running. Checks were made in August and the rubber springs were found to have perished. Larger rubber springs were fitted, but these did not appear to improve matters whatsoever. The booster was dismantled in November 1935 and the steam sanding gear was removed. The booster cylinders were later fitted to P1 number 2393 in February 1937. The first C1s immediately began working the principal Great Northern Expresses, displacing the Stirling singles to other duties. By 1912, the C1s were divided between King's Cross, New England, Grantham and Doncaster. Number 1442 was chosen as the Great Northern's Royal Engine in 1908 and was given replicas of the Great Northern's coat of arms as well as burnished fittings. It hauled King Edward VII's train from London to Leeds on the 7th of July 1908 and in 1909 was exhibited at the Imperial International Exhibition at White City, London. During June 1909, a series of exchange trials took place between the C1s and the London and North Western Railway's precursor class of 440s. The C1s showed a small coal economy over the precursors. Generally speaking, in their early days, the C1s did not perform quite as well as expected, especially when hauling heavier trains. This became a greater concern from 1916, when war conditions caused train loads to increase to 500 tons. After a number of incidents of C1s stalling in the tunnels just north of King's Cross, a 440 pilot would be provided for trains over 450 tons in weight between King's Cross and Potter's Bar. Shortly after grouping, the LNER introduced the Harrogate Pullman from King's Cross to Newcastle via Leeds, Harrogate and Ripon. This started in June 1923 and King's Cross C1s were used to haul the King's Cross to Leeds section. In September 1925, the Harrogate Pullman was extended all the way to Edinburgh using the Church Fenton, Tadcaster and Wetherby route to Harrogate. B3460s were initially used south of Harrogate, but C1s were used from March 1927 onwards. D11 directors were allocated to Copley Hill to help with the Harrogate Pullman and West Riding Pullman services. From 1932, a large effort was made to speed up the principal express services, and although the Copley Hill D11 directors did well, they were unable to match the speeds achieved by the King's Cross C1s. So C1s were then allocated to Copley Hill to haul Pullman services. With the advent of the A4 Pacific hauled Silver Jubilee service in 1935, the West Riding Pullman terminated at Harrogate rather than Newcastle. Despite this, the train grew to 9 coaches, and the C1s began to struggle with the weight. From 1937 onwards, A4 Pacifics were used instead, and the C1s were only used when there was a shortage of A3 and A4 Pacifics. Many of the C1s were moved to Sheffield. These tended to be in a run-down condition and at first were not popular. After overhauls at Doncaster, the C1s quickly became a favourite of the crews in Sheffield. Sheffield C1s worked passenger services to Liverpool, Manchester, York, Leicester, and even Swindon via the Great Western Railway tracks. From 1928, Cambridge also received an allocation of C1s for passenger expresses. These were sped up in 1932 and marketed as Garden Cities and Cambridge Buffet Expresses, although they were quickly dubbed as beer trains. C2s, B12s and Claudes also worked these services alongside the C1s. The C1s were restricted from running on most of the Great Eastern Network, but the Cambridge C1s were allowed to haul race specials to Newmarket. Even in the 1930s, the C1s were capable of great feats despite their age. A notable run occurred in July 1936 and was recorded by Cecil J. Allen, who said he wouldn't have believed his timings if someone had sent them to him. On at least 3 occasions, he had to check that a second locomotive had not been added. The train was rather large, consisting of 17 coaches, and was 585 tons, running from King's Cross to Edinburgh. The scheduled A3 failed at Grantham, and was replaced by the Grantham Pilot, C1 number 4404. Which was 31 years old at the time and not in the best of conditions. It was driven by R. Walker, who reportedly was not very experienced with the class. Number 4404 took 3 attempts to start the train, but managed to reach Selby in 67 minutes and 41 seconds. Over 60 miles had been covered at an average speed of 64 miles per hour. A slow finish brought the train into York at 87 minutes and 40 seconds, versus a schedule of 90 minutes. Over 2 minutes were taken off the schedule when the circumstances would have justified a late arrival of 20 minutes or more. During wartime, C1s were seen more often north of York, and occasionally they were seen north of Newcastle. A wartime shortage of staff, materials and spare parts took their toll on the class, and their condition deteriorated rapidly. Withdrawal of the standard C1s started in 1943, and was sped up with the post-war production of Thompson B1s. 17 C1s survived into BR ownership. Although all 17 were allocated BR numbers, only number 62822, formerly number 298, received it. The last C1 was withdrawn in November 1950. We'll now look at some of the accidents and incidents involving members of the class. On September 19th, 1906, locomotive number 276 was hauling a sleeper train which was derailed at Grantham, Lincolnshire due to excessive speed through the station after passing signals at danger. 14 people were killed and 17 were injured. On February 13th, 1923, locomotive number 298 was hauling an express passenger train that overran signals and was in a rear-end collision with a freight train at Retford, Nottinghamshire. 3 people were killed. And finally, on June 15th, 1935, locomotive number 4411 was hauling a passenger train that was run into by an express passenger service at Welwyn Garden City due to a signalman's error. 14 people were killed and 29 were injured. According to the Railway magazine, the last engine in service was BR number 62822, formerly Great Northern Railway 294. On the 26th of November 1950, she hauled a train one way from King's Cross to Doncaster to mark the end of the class. Among the many on board was the son of Henry Ivatt, Mr. Henry George Ivatt, who received one of the builder's plates. On display at Doncaster was Pioneer Sister, former Great Northern Railway number 251, already preserved, and a number of modern engines. The return trip to London was hauled by A1 Pacific 60123, named suitably enough H.A. Ivatt. One member of the class was lucky enough to survive into preservation. Great Northern Railway number 251 was the first member of the class to be built and was withdrawn in 1947 and saved for the National Collection. She underwent a restoration back to her Great Northern condition, regaining her original number. During her restoration, parts were used from other scrapped members of the class. One of her first duties after overhaul was to see classmate 62822 hauling the final C1 service in 1950. In 1952, she returned to King's Cross as part of the station's centenary celebrations. In 1953, she hauled a series of enthusiast specials to celebrate the centenary of Doncaster Works. Unfortunately, she struggled to perform due to her boiler retaining flues from when it was superheated. As a result, C2 Atlantic number 990 Henry Oakley was brought in to pilot these specials. The following year, number 251 was piloted by a Great Central Railway D11 class 62663 Prince Albert. After a spell in the paint shop at Doncaster Works, she moved to York Railway Museum in 1957, which would later become the National Railway Museum. She would then have spells at Locomotion in Shildon, Bressingham Steam Gardens and Barrow Hill Roundhouse. And in 2021, she moved into the Danham Gallery, Library and Museum in Doncaster. I'd like to thank you all for watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to hit the like button, and if you want to see what gets covered next on the show, I highly recommend you subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments down below if you think the C1 deserves to have more members of the class in preservation. As with many other LNER locomotives in preservation, it is the sole survivor. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Thank you, and goodbye.